Hey there, welcome back. I am Jaxon. In this episode, I'll be examining moments where influencers test their mortality with wild animals, from a cramped snake handler's shack in rural Thailand to doing photography in the shallow tide pools of a remote Philippine coastline. Let's start with the first story, where a young influencer's pursuit of a viral moment brought her face to face with one of Asia's most dangerous snakes. It was July 18, 2016, in rural northern Thailand, where the afternoon heat pressed down on a cluster of low wooden structures set well back from any main road. The area was remote, accessible only by a winding dirt track, and operated entirely outside the reach of local wildlife regulations. Camila Vera, 24, was a travel and fashion content creator from Valencia, Spain, who had built a following of several 100,000 across her platforms. Her content revolved around what she framed as authentic cultural experiences, situations that appeared forbidden, risky, or legally ambiguous enough to generate attention. In the months prior, her engagement had spiked after a set of photographs taken beside sedated tigers at a roadside attraction in central Thailand. That response pushed her toward finding something more striking. And honestly, that's where the story starts going sideways. The tiger photos had already crossed a line most people wouldn't. Using that as a baseline and then asking what's next is a genuinely dangerous way to think about content. Through local contacts, she was introduced to a man running an unlicensed operation in which monocled cobras were kept inside clay jars and woven baskets and made available for tourist photo shoots. She arrived at the site with a friend who carried her camera equipment. The handler explained the setup before the session began, making clear that the snakes responded to vibration and sudden movement, not to music, as was commonly believed, and instructed her not to panic if any of the animals elevated themselves or spread their hoods. She walked into an illegal facility in a remote area with no medical support nearby, to be surrounded by venomous snakes. I'm not sure what the plan was if something went wrong, because there clearly wasn't one. The shoot was arranged inside a cramped wooden outbuilding where jars were stacked along the walls and grouped in corners, baskets wedged between wooden support posts, and stacked storage crates, the kind of disorganized, improvised arrangement common to illegal operations running out of repurposed space. Before getting into what happened, it's worth understanding what was actually in that room. The monocled cobra is one of Southeast Asia's most dangerous elapids, found across Thailand, Myanmar, and Vietnam. Adults average 4 to 5 feet in length, with larger individuals exceeding 6 feet. Their venom is primarily neurotoxic. It blocks nerve signal transmission, causing progressive paralysis that advances from the bite site toward the respiratory muscles. A significant envenomation can produce respiratory failure within hours if antivenom and ventilatory support aren't immediately available. Monocled cobras are quick to strike when startled, and a disturbed environment, sudden sound, vibration, a falling object, can trigger a defensive response across multiple animals simultaneously. Filming began with Camilla in the center of the arrangement. Several cobras spread their hoods and tracked her movements as the session continued. One snake moved closer to her leg than anticipated. Her response was instinctive. She jerked backward and struck a container behind her with her elbow, knocking it from its resting position onto the floor. And that's the thing about putting yourself in a room full of agitated, venomous snakes. Your instincts will eventually take over. You can be calm for 5 minutes. You can't override a panic reflex indefinitely. The crash sent an immediate agitation through the room. One cobra struck her forearm before handlers could intervene. As she stumbled sideways, a second container was knocked over, releasing another animal that bit near her shoulder in the resulting chaos. Her friend had set the camera down at that point and was attempting to help as handlers rushed in from outside. Handlers later stated they believed both bites had delivered significant venom loads based on the speed at which symptoms developed during transport. Camilla was pulled from the structure and transported toward the nearest town with a medical facility. The operation's remote location put her far from any clinic equipped to manage severe cobra envenomation. During transit, she developed slurred speech, progressive muscle weakness, and increasing difficulty breathing. Medical staff attempted anti-venom treatment and respiratory support upon arrival, but the neurotoxic load had already advanced too far. She died that night from respiratory failure. Authorities raided the property in the days that followed, recovering numerous illegally held venomous snakes. The handler faced charges under local wildlife protection statutes. There was no formal record of how many visitors had used the facility before the incident. From what I've come across in cases like this, the speed of neurotoxic envenomation is almost always underestimated. Symptoms don't always appear dramatic in the first few minutes, and by the time the severity becomes obvious, the window for effective treatment has often already closed. That case involved someone who sought out the risk deliberately. The next story carries a different setup, but an equally fatal outcome, showing how access to a captive predator doesn't make that predator safe and how quickly impatience can become irreversible. It was March 4th, 2017, on the outskirts of Dubai, where a high-walled private estate sat behind a gate on a stretch of desert road with no public signage. Beyond the main grounds and a collection of imported vehicles, a series of animal enclosures had been constructed for the owner's personal collection of exotic predators. Layla Haddad, 27, was a luxury lifestyle content creator from Beirut, Lebanon, whose platform was built around access to exclusive and legally ambiguous spaces, private estates, restricted venues, and the kind of wealth that operated outside ordinary oversight. Her audience followed her because she regularly appeared in places most people could never reach. An invitation to the estate came through a mutual contact, and the primary draw was a full-grown male African lion that had been held in private captivity since birth. The owner presented the animal as socialized and calm around people, citing its upbringing as the basis for its temperament. That framing, raised around humans, therefore safe, is one of the most dangerous things you can believe about a large predator. It gets repeated constantly in private exotic ownership circles, and it has preceded a lot of very bad outcomes. Layla's initial footage was filmed from outside the enclosure. Witnesses described her expressing dissatisfaction with the material shortly into the session, finding it lacked the visual impact she was after, so she pushed further. That pattern, getting access to something genuinely dangerous and then deciding it still isn't enough, is exactly how these situations escalate. A handler allowed her into a secondary maintenance corridor, a narrow passage used during feeding and cleaning rotations that ran adjacent to the main holding area. The corridor was separated from the lion by a heavy sliding service gate used during feeding transfers. Witnesses later confirmed the gate had been resting against its frame without engaging the locking mechanism, an oversight that went unnoticed before Layla entered the space. Over a period of several minutes, she crouched close to the barrier and reached toward the animal through the gap on multiple occasions. At this point, every single layer of protection that should have existed had either been removed or ignored. An illegal facility, an unsecured gate, and someone repeatedly putting their hand through an opening toward a 400-pound predator. It's hard to watch this unfold on paper and not feel the weight of how avoidable it all was. Adult male African lions stand close to 4 feet at the shoulder and weigh between 350 and 420 pounds. Their forelimb strength is sufficient to pin large prey flat in a single motion, and their bite force exceeds 650 pounds per square inch, enough to compress and fracture bone. Captive raised lions retain the full predatory instincts of wild individuals. Familiarity with humans does not eliminate prey drive responses, and animals raised in confinement are capable of reacting with the same speed and force as wild counterparts when a stimulus triggers a strike. Research on captive large cat incidents consistently identifies unsecured barriers and sustained close proximity as the 2 highest risk factors in handler and visitor fatalities. The attack occurred when Layla shifted her body sideways, briefly turning away from the gate. The movement coincided with the lion forcing the unlatched panel open wide enough to act. Sultan came through the gap, low and fast, seized her by the upper body, and pulled her downward, pinning her to the floor of the corridor with his full weight bearing down. Handlers attempted to drive the animal back using poles and a fire extinguisher. The injuries sustained in the opening seconds were catastrophic. Emergency responders arrived within a reasonable time frame, but Layla was pronounced dead before reaching a hospital. The injuries were not compatible with survival. authorities investigated the estate for violations of UAE regulations governing the private ownership of dangerous animals and for permitting untrained individuals direct access to a predator enclosure. The owner faced legal proceedings. The lion was not destroyed, but was relocated to a different holding facility under government oversight. From what I've seen in captive predator incidents, the pattern is consistent. The animal's calm behavior during previous encounters gets treated as a fixed characteristic rather than a conditional one. The gate wasn't latched. The distance was measured in inches. And when the animal moved, it was over before anyone in that corridor could do anything about it. None of that was unpredictable. All of it was ignored. That story happened behind closed walls on private property. The next one played out in open water, in broad daylight, and shows how someone can walk straight into the most well-documented danger in a region and treat it like a performance. It was September 11th, 2015, along a river in the top end of Australia's Northern Territory, where the last of the afternoon light turned the water a dull amber and thick riverine vegetation pressed in from both banks. The area had a documented saltwater crocodile population, and the timing fell squarely within the breeding season, a period when territorial aggression in the species increases substantially. Derek Molina, 31, was a fitness content creator from Phoenix, Arizona, whose platform was built almost entirely on physical fearlessness. His videos centered on confronting things his audience found threatening: extreme physical challenges, dangerous stunts, and repeated dismissals of safety precautions as exaggerated or socially conditioned. I'll be straightforward about this one. The entire premise of his platform was built on convincing people that caution was weakness. That's a fine persona for lifting heavy things in a gym. It is a genuinely dangerous one to carry into crocodile territory. He had been traveling through northern Australia for several weeks, producing wilderness content, and had been moving progressively closer to wildlife interaction with each upload. Local fishermen working the riverbanks had offered warnings on multiple occasions about approaching the water near dusk, particularly during the breeding season. Wildlife signage in the area was direct and specific about crocodile activity along that stretch. Molina had acknowledged those warnings in earlier footage, framing them as the kind of overcautious guidance he was there to challenge. Those warnings didn't come from bureaucrats sitting in an office. They came from people who work that river every day. Dismissing them as exaggerated wasn't bravery, it was just bad judgment dressed up as confidence. He had spotted a crocodile resting in the shallows near the bank, partially submerged, and moved toward the water while a companion positioned with a camera on the bank. He entered the water barefoot and shirtless. Before he made contact with that animal, here is what he was actually approaching. Saltwater crocodiles are the largest living reptiles on Earth. Adult males in northern Australia average 14 to 17 feet in length and weigh between 1,000 and 1,500 pounds, with large individuals exceeding those figures significantly. They are ambush predators that rely on concealment and stillness to eliminate distance before striking. In murky, low-light water, estimating a crocodile's true size from the bank is extremely unreliable. The portion of the animal visible at the surface represents a small fraction of its total mass. During breeding season, territorial responses are faster and less tolerant of proximity. A death roll, the full-body rotational movement used to disorient prey and tear away tissue, generates enough torque to fracture bone and drag a person underwater almost immediately, and someone caught in open water has no effective means of resisting it. The animal Molina approached was significantly larger than it had appeared from the bank. The moment he made physical contact near the tail, the crocodile erupted into motion. Witnesses on the bank described it whipping sideways before immediately beginning a roll. Molina lost his footing within seconds and was pulled into deeper water. His companion dropped the recording equipment and called for help. Witnesses reported seeing the crocodile drag Molina beneath the surface multiple times before he disappeared. A search team operated through the night and into the following morning. His body was recovered downstream. Wildlife officers who assessed the scene stated that the encounter had taken place under conditions, dusk, breeding season, murky water, direct physical contact, that represented the highest possible risk category for crocodile interaction in the region. Every documented safety protocol for the area had been disregarded. The death was classified as a wildlife fatality. No action was taken against the crocodile. The area remained accessible with existing signage. There was no formal inquest beyond standard procedures. The crocodile did exactly what a saltwater crocodile in breeding season, approached and grabbed in murky water at dusk, will do. There was nothing unusual about its behavior. The only unusual thing was that a person chose to be there, in the water, initiating contact. From time spent near rivers in crocodile habitat, the thing that consistently stands out is how empty the water looks until it isn't. The risk feels abstract when nothing is moving. That abstraction is what got him. That case involved a deliberate choice to engage. The next story is harder to categorize. A person who understood the rules, followed them throughout most of her trip, and was undone in a single moment by the pressure to get one specific photograph. It was August 22, 2018, on a private wildlife reserve in South Africa's Limpopo province, where an afternoon drive was moving slowly along a rutted track through low acacia scrub. The light was flat and golden, and the vehicle had stopped to allow a resting male lion, positioned only a few feet from the road, to be photographed. Naomi Mercer, 26, was a wildlife photography content creator from Vancouver, Canada, whose work emphasized close-range cinematic animal imagery. She had a genuine interest in conservation and had spoken publicly about the importance of responsible wildlife interaction. She had booked the excursion through a small private reserve offering guided open vehicle game drives and had completed 3 full days on the property without incident. This case is the one that stays with me the most, honestly, because Naomi wasn't someone chasing danger for its own sake. She cared about the subject. But caring about wildlife and respecting its danger in the moment are two different things, and the gap between them is where this story happens. Before entering any predator territory, the guide had delivered a clear safety briefing. Remain seated at all times, keep all limbs and equipment within the vehicle's frame, and avoid sudden movements in any direction. The reasoning was explained directly. Lions generally ignore open vehicles as large, neutral objects, but they respond to isolated movement that appears visually separate from that mass. The vehicle itself was the safety margin. Outside of it, that margin did not exist. Passengers began photographing the resting lion from their seats after the vehicle stopped. Witnesses described Naomi adjusting her position progressively to compensate for a partially obstructed camera angle caused by another passenger's placement. And I understand the frustration. You've traveled far, the light is perfect, and someone's elbow is in your shot. But the solution to that problem is not to put yourself outside the vehicle. It just isn't. Adult male African lions are capable of covering 10 to 12 feet horizontally in a single bound and can react to a movement trigger in under a second. Their ambush instinct is not suppressed by the presence of vehicles or people. It is suppressed specifically by the visual absence of isolated, separated movement. The moment a person's silhouette detaches from the vehicle's profile, that suppression can disappear without warning. Field studies on lion behavior in safari environments have consistently identified this mechanism as the leading cause of predator-related open vehicle incidents. A lion that had been resting passively for several minutes can shift to a charge in the same instant the trigger registers. Naomi had stepped down onto the outer running board of the Jeep, lowering herself below the side railing to aim her camera at a downward angle toward the lion. The guide later confirmed the lion had shown no signs of alertness toward the vehicle until her movement, now fully separated from the vehicle's profile, registered below the railing line. The lunge was immediate. The guide accelerated at the same moment. Other passengers pulled Naomi back into the vehicle during the retreat, but the lion had already made contact. She was airlifted from the reserve by emergency services and died before reaching the trauma facility. The cause of death was recorded as severe injuries to the neck and upper chest. Reserve management and the Regional Wildlife Authority both reviewed the incident. The guide was cleared. He had delivered the full safety briefing and had been operating within standard procedure throughout. The lion was not destroyed, having acted in accordance with its natural behavioral patterns. The reserve subsequently installed reinforced side barriers on their open vehicle fleet. What strikes me most in cases like this is how the pressure of content creation can quietly override judgment that a person genuinely has. Naomi knew the rule. She'd followed it for 3 days, and then one imperfect shot angle was enough to make her step outside the one thing keeping her safe. That's not stupidity. It's a kind of tunnel vision that the pursuit of a specific image can create. But the outcome is the same regardless of the reason. What happened on that reserve unfolded during a controlled excursion in daylight with a guide present. The next case is different. It started at a remote campsite with no guide, no vehicle, and an animal that should never have been touched at all. It was January 29th, 2014, in a remote section of outback Queensland, Australia, where a small camping group had set up near a dry creek bed several miles from the nearest town. The landscape was open and flat, the scrub sparse and low, and the heat had already begun climbing sharply by mid-morning. Brielle Dawson, 22, was an adventure content creator from Manchester, England, who had relocated to rural Australia several months prior. Her platform was built around a persona of adapting to life in the Australian bush, filming her reactions to local wildlife, joking about its dangers, and presenting herself as someone rapidly assimilating into the environment. She had no formal wildlife training and no background in animal handling of any kind. The group was camping on privately owned land with the landowner's permission. No wildlife guide or ranger was present, and the nearest snake catcher service operated out of the closest regional town, several miles away. That morning, a snake was spotted moving through low scrub near the campsite perimeter. Rather than maintaining distance or contacting the appropriate services, Brielle recognized it as an opportunity for content. Her companions made repeated attempts to dissuade her from approaching the animal. Her friends told her to leave it alone, multiple times. That part matters, because it means this wasn't a situation where nobody saw the risk. Everyone around her saw it. She just decided the video was worth more than the warning. The eastern brown snake is the second most venomous land snake in the world by subcutaneous toxicity. Adults typically reach 5 to 6 feet in length and are among the fastest moving snakes on the continent. Their venom contains both neurotoxins and procoagulants, compounds that simultaneously attack the nervous system and cause disseminated intravascular coagulation, a condition in which the body's clotting mechanisms break down entirely. Bites frequently cause little or no immediate pain, which consistently causes victims to underestimate the severity of envenomation and delay treatment. Eastern brown snakes are highly defensive when restrained or cornered and will deliver multiple rapid strikes under those conditions, without hesitation, using a stick and a pair of thin gardening gloves, neither of which offered any meaningful protection against a bite. Brielle attempted to pin the snake against the ground. Thin gardening gloves against one of the most venomous snakes on the planet. I don't know what the logic was there, but it's the kind of detail that makes you realize how completely the risk had been underestimated. The animal became progressively agitated throughout the handling attempt. As she reached toward its head, it struck multiple times in quick succession. Witnesses on the scene believed at least one bite had delivered a significant venom load. She showed no severe symptoms immediately following the strike and remained engaged with the group for a short period afterward. Within minutes, however, she became pale, nauseated, and unable to stay upright. No compression bandage was available at the campsite, and she remained mobile during the evacuation, which accelerated venom circulation. Her condition declined rapidly. The campsite's distance from medical services meant that the time spent transporting her proved critical. The gap between the bite and the start of treatment was too wide to overcome. Antivenom could not be administered in time. Brielle was pronounced dead before reaching the hospital. The incident was later incorporated into public safety materials distributed by Queensland wildlife authorities, cited specifically as an example of the dangers of amateur snake handling in remote settings. No legal proceedings followed. In snakebite fatalities I've reviewed, the factor that appears most consistently is time. In a location with immediate access to antivenom and emergency care, an eastern brown bite is survivable. In a remote campsite with no professional support for miles, that window closes before help can arrive. The decision to handle the animal was what created that gap. And honestly, the decision was made with a camera rolling and an audience in mind. That's what it came down to. That case played out in open daylight at a campsite, with an animal that signaled its threat clearly throughout. The next story involves something far smaller, something that gives almost no warning at all, and a death that progressed in minutes on a dark coastline. It was May 7th, 2018, on a stretch of rocky coastline near a small fishing village on Bohol Island in the Philippines, where a group of tourists had joined local guides for a nighttime tide pool excursion. The tide was low, and the shallow pools between the rocks held sea urchins, small crabs, and slow-moving fish illuminated by handheld flashlights. Mateo Vargas, 25, was a travel content creator from Buenos Aires, Argentina, who had spent several months producing challenge-based videos across Southeast Asia and the Pacific. A significant portion of his content involved deliberate physical interaction with wildlife and environments that local guidance explicitly warned against. He had booked the excursion independently through a small village operator with no prior communication about the restrictions that applied to the tour. At the start of the walk, guides issued clear instructions: do not touch anything in the pools, and specifically avoid any small octopuses sheltering beneath rocks or in crevices. One guide drew particular attention to the blue-ringed octopus by name, explaining that despite its size, it was one of the most dangerous animals in the ocean. The warning was given specifically, clearly, and directly. What happened next was a choice. Those warnings were medically justified in terms that are difficult to overstate. The blue-ringed octopus is among the most venomous animals on Earth. Adults measure only 5 to 8 inches across, including their tentacles, and weigh less than 2 ounces, small enough to rest in the palm of a hand. Their venom, tetrodotoxin, is estimated to be approximately 1,200 times more toxic than cyanide by weight. A single animal carries enough venom to kill over 24 adult humans, though actual yield varies between individuals. There is no antidote. The bite is nearly painless, and the animal does not always display its characteristic vivid blue rings until it is actively handled or agitated. Without mechanical ventilation to maintain breathing, respiratory arrest can occur within minutes in severe envenomations. Partway through the excursion, Mateo spotted a small octopus in a shallow pool, displaying its blue rings. He picked it up, barehanded. The guides moved immediately toward him, but he had already been holding the animal for several seconds before they reached him. He had just been told, specifically, not to touch the small octopuses. He then picked up a small octopus that was actively displaying its warning coloration. The blue rings are the animal's way of communicating danger. It was doing everything short of putting up a sign. At some point during the handling, the octopus bit him near the base of his thumb. The bite produced no noticeable reaction at the time. The camera he had been carrying was set down on a nearby rock before any symptoms appeared. Within a few minutes, he reported numbness spreading around his mouth and began showing signs of disorientation. Paralysis progressed through his limbs, and he was unable to support himself independently. Emergency responders from the nearest village were contacted immediately and arrived roughly 20 to 25 minutes later. By that point, his respiratory function had deteriorated severely. Medical personnel attempted to maintain his airway and support his breathing manually, but the equipment available at the nearest small clinic was insufficient to sustain ventilation against the full progression of tetrodotoxin poisoning. He suffered respiratory failure and died before a transfer to a better-equipped facility could be arranged. The local maritime authority reviewed the incident and cleared the guides. Warnings had been issued clearly, specifically, and more than once. The village operator subsequently introduced a strict no-contact policy for all tide pool tours, with physical barriers erected around sections of the pools where venomous marine animals were commonly observed.